Presenting sponsor of Rates and Barrels is Topps.com and Topps Project 70. Topps is celebrating the 70th anniversary of its very first baseball card design with a new program that pushes boundaries while paying homage to the company's heritage. Project 70 has brought together creators of all kinds for this extraordinary set. Graphic designers, tattoo and graffiti artists, animators, illustrators, painters, and even a jeweler make up the artist roster, which includes names like Snoop Dogg, Action Bronson, Ben Baller, Jeff Staple, Brittany Palmer, Tyson Beck, Alex Pardee, and more. Each artist will select their own MLB players and Topps designs from any year to craft a unique story. My favorite card up right now is that Ernie Banks card that just dropped. Really cool design there. And I'm not even a Cubs fan. I think it's a good card. 3 new cards launch daily all year long on Topps.com and are only available for 70 hours before they're gone for good. And while you're there, be on the lookout for special cards. Head to Topps.com to learn more about Project 70 and to check out which cards are live right now. Welcome to Rates and Barrels, presented by Topps. Check out Topps Project 70, celebrating 70 years of Topps baseball cards. Derek Van Riper here with Eno Saris. It is Monday, August 30th. On this episode, we will talk about Vlad Jr. and some potential adjustments that teams have made while trying to pitch to him over the course of the season. That kind of dovetails with some questions about regression overall, so we'll get into that. We will talk about an idea for improving reach rate or O-swing percentage, as we've talked about that stat quite a bit on this show over the course of the last year or so. We'll get into some late season decision making now that we're approaching the final month of the fantasy baseball season. And we're going to dust off beer of the month. It's time, it's the end of the month. We got to get a beer of the month selection in there. So lots of ground to cover. And I want to start just going right at it with the Vlad Jr. question. This came from an email that Nick sent us. And he writes, any insight on how a player starts so hot for months and then becomes cold? Other than a player regresses, what can his slower streak be attributed to? Ground ball rate for Vlad Jr. is higher, and he's been colder in Toronto than in Florida and Buffalo. But why? Are pitchers pitching to him differently? Is the change of park that big of a deal? Is it fatigue? What are the chances he can have a bounce-back September? And the same goes for Ohtani, but he's pitching while hitting and still seems to be hitting for power and stealing bases. So obviously a lot more appeal here than just Vlad Jr. and Ohtani, but is this just your typical sort of regression case? And within regression, we're always talking about this being a game of adjustments, right? Pitchers are going to try and do different things to you if you're having a level of success like what we saw from both Vlad Jr. and Ohtani throughout the first half.
Yeah, I mean, part of it was the park. I think it's interesting you mentioned that he's gone colder in Toronto. I think that the park they were playing with in Dunedin was very hitter friendly. So I think that was part of it. Like he just was in a great hitter friendly park. I also think that, there's something that Marcus Semien was telling me about becoming a high fastball hitter. He said that it was an adjustment he made. And he said he made it against Aroldis Chapman. He said that he started targeting the top half of the ball on four-seamers because they have that ride. And that allowed him to hit the ball flush, hit for power. Once you can hit the high fastball, that's what pitchers are trying to do these days, in large part, is do the high fastball with the low breaking ball. Adrian Beltre said that the high fastball if you start targeting the high fastball, the low breaking ball looks like crap because it looks like it's coming off a totally different plane. It's going totally different direction. Looks like it's further away. And so then you make yourself better at both pitches. So I think that's sort of what happened with Vlad, because I see improved slugging percentages on the four seam high in the zone from last year to this year. And then I see an adjustment from pitchers where they have now started throwing him low four seams. And I think that's something you can see from Walker Buehler, is that a low four seam can be effective if you are facing hitters that have that sort of high four seam strategy. Because a low four seam will be taken for a called strike. Then if you get them swinging at the low four seam, then you can break out the low breaking balls and they swing over the top of the breaking balls again. So that's one thing that some pitchers can fall into, is being too obvious with their strategies. Just it's all high four seams. They never throw a low four seam. You kind of have to start mixing it up that way too. Otherwise, people will just put you in a box. So I think that's it's such a general story, and it's such a thing that could happen to anybody, that I think that it's not something like that means, oh, we're going to overvalue Vlad Guerrero and Jr. in drafts next year, and he's been figured out, and blah blah blah. I think it's just part of the sort of back and forth that happens in baseball.
Yeah, the normal ebbs and flows of a season. I think we also, as much as we know that a level like what Vlad Jr. was doing in the first half, that 332, 430, 658 line, like we want to believe that he can do that over a full season. There's something about seeing that for an entire year that would just amaze all of us. So in our heads, we're like, well, he's not going to regress that much. And his second half is still good. A 270, 356, 447 line. Obviously, that slugging number especially is well below where we'd expect him to be. But it's sort of just one of these things where you can't take any player's first half and just assume that it's going to be that good.
On pace for.
Yeah, the on pace for thing never, ever, it just doesn't work like that. And I think with Vlad Jr., there will always be that little kernel of doubt when the ground ball rate soars, but I think the way you're describing how he would have been attacking high fastballs does give you a little bit of an understanding of how he might be hitting the top of the ball a little more often right now, as pitchers have changed where they're locating fastballs against him. It's interesting, too, that you brought up Buehler just for a minute. It's kind of a little side path, because he was among the big spin losers, since the crackdown back in June. And I was trying to figure out, like, how has he been so effective? But yeah, it sounds like a completely different location strategy might be a big part of how he's been able to adjust to not having the same effectiveness of the high fastball that he previously had.
Yeah, he also throws wicked hard, so that helps. But there was he once told me something that interesting that I haven't super verified yet. But he said that the Dodgers told him that over 94 miles per hour spin means less, because there's only so much ride you'll get. I think it has to do with like time to the plate, that's something about like moving the mound back. You actually might be able to get more ride out of your fastballs because there's more time for it to differentiate. Because if you think about it, like if you're looking on YouTube, like the whole idea of ride is that like this is what your brain expects the ball is going to do, and instead it does this, and so the difference between what your brain expects it to do and what it actually does, if you give it more space and move the mound back, will be larger.
Right. And you'll have this unintended consequence of moving the mound back and making dominant high spin, high velocity pitchers actually more effective by changing that variable.
Yeah, good luck enforcing the sticky strategy then, if that's what they realize. And also the early numbers out of the league are interesting in that strikeout rate hasn't really gone down. And they're all trying to figure that bit out. But yeah, I think that would be terrible if we moved the mound back and got more strikeouts for it. I talk about this dystopian nightmare where we move the mound back and we put in robo umps. And the moving the mound back, because of what I'm talking about in terms of giving the ball more time to move, moving the mound back could incentivize pitchers to throw more breaking balls. You know what else could incentivize pitchers to throw more breaking balls is the robo zone, because there's two pitch types that are called the least right now, that are called strikes correctly the least, and that's the two-seamer that comes back to the plate, like a front door. Or anything front door. So that could be a breaking ball. So breaking balls and two-seamers that come back to the plate, and the other is ones that clip the bottom of the zone and like hit the ground or get caught really close to the ground. Those two pitches are not called strikes a lot. And so you see my dystopian nightmare coming together here?
Oh, yeah.
It's like every pitcher is Sergio Romo or Rich Hill.
Well,
Which I'm cool. I kind of like watching those guys, but they don't have great command, and they're always just trying to like nip the bottom of the zone with or the side of the zone with their breaking balls. And I don't know. I don't think I'd want that to be everything I watched.
No, I don't think that would be the best way to go about adjusting things to make the game more watchable like that.
And I don't think it would lead to a lot fewer strikeouts, actually.
No, I don't think so either. But the other side of this too is, I was thinking about, well, who's crushing in the second half right now? Like this Vlad Jr., Ohtani, like first half, amazing players, guys that have cooled off a little bit. Who's turned it around? I think Juan Soto is near the top of that list. I mean, he looks like typical Juan Soto again, which I don't think is that much of a surprise. Like I think the track record he had entering the season for a player his age, it made all the sense in the world that he was going to start hitting. And I think he said
a little bit of an injury hiccup
back on track.
Yeah, and a little bit of the injury hiccup in the beginning of the season where he had a shoulder thing.
Yeah,
so I think some of it was just
healthy now.
Yeah.
So you see some correction going that way. You see guys like Austin Riley, who's been a little bit erratic this year for as good as he's been. It's been a full-on like massive step forward and breakout for him. But he's among the best players in the league in the second half of the season. 14 homers now in his last 41 games, driving in runs, scoring runs. I mean, no one's expecting him to hit over 300 in the long run. That's just never really been part of his profile. But I don't think there are any doubts about the power at this point. He's well on his way to like a mid-30s sort of home run total this season. And I wonder, is he the kind of player who is going to be overdrafted because of recency bias and because of some of these concerns that crop up, especially when the second half is the better of your two halves? I feel like a lot of times that's what drives value above where it should go.
Yeah. I wanted to say, he really improved his reach rate, right? And that is good news, but he improved it to league average, right? So I don't think I buy a 9% walk rate, really. Although league average is what, 8.5, so not that far off. But I just it's a little bit aggressive for me. I could see an alternate reality where like you put the two worst parts of a season back to back, and everyone has a completely different opinion of him.
Yeah, I mean, there was a stretch where it looked like he had cooled off to the point where he could lose playing time again. I think it was late first half. I want to say it was around June, where Riley looked like one of those guys that the league had sort of figured out again. Obviously, he's adjusted back and has become one of the Braves' more consistent hitters, and it's been huge for them, given all the losses they've had. But I just...
It's interesting, a 643 OPS in June where he had a 5% walk rate.
Yeah, and the power, I mean... Jeez, he had the same number. He has the same number of homers in the second half in 41 games as he had in the first half over 88 games. So I think there's going to be probably a little more hype on him than there probably should be, just based on the shape of this season.
One thing I do like is just there's a consistent barrel ability, right? Like that's been consistent all 3 years. He's had a barrel rate over 10%. So he hits the ball hard when he does. He has that sound. That's something we knew from the first time we heard his batting practice in the AFL. What I do like about the beginning of this season was an emphasis on not reaching, making more contact, having better ABs that didn't always end up in power. So if you can marry those two together, you can have a legit breakout. He's 24, so he's not necessarily going to get worse when it comes to strikeout rate or walk rate. A lot of these things wouldn't necessarily get worse. In fact, athletically, he has 2 more years between him and when you start, thinking that things might start going downhill, or 3 years at least. So the one thing that I would say is, like, if you don't bet on the average, if you buy him at like a 260 average next year and 30 plus homers, 35 homers, then I think you can still buy him. But I think you're right. I think people are going to look at the average and think that's totally redoable, and I'm not sure that is.
How often do you look at projections this time of year for the rest of the season as maybe a way of getting a sneak preview of what the slash line might look like?
100%.
Projection system updates for next year. Like, how different is that projection really going to be? Is it 268, 334, 490 for the BAT X for the rest of the season? Within I would guess 5 points in average and maybe 8 to 10 points in OBP. I would assume that's where the 2022 projection is going to come out.
Yeah, I think that basically the projections are they're always rolling and updating, right? The only difference in the offseason is they stop getting new information, so they sort of freeze it at some point. But I don't think there's going to be a huge difference. In fact, I think that's a great proxy for next year's projections.
And if he's treated like he's going to hit 285, 350, 500, then you're probably overpaying for Riley. So it's a good way to get that sneak peek at the second half. You're trying to get ahead on your planning for next season. But thanks a lot for that question, Nick. It's always fun to dig into regression, trying to figure out how exactly it's happening. Because, again, we know when things aren't right, when things are too good or too bad, we can generally look at projections and go, yeah, okay, this is going to track back this way. The underlying process by which it happens, that varies pretty wildly, I think, from player to player. Let's get to this other question that came in from Ned. He wrote that while catching up on last week's podcast, Eno made the point about reach rate being the measuring tool for the effectiveness of a team's hitting coach. Thinking about reach rate, I wondered whether this plate discipline stat could be refined similarly to how WOBA and WRC Plus attempt to rectify the inherent flaw in how OPS equally values slugging and on-base skills. What if we can use a combination of the location of a specific pitch with possibly its barrel percentage or maybe its expected run value to properly weight the value of laying off a pitch millimeters outside the zone versus a 55-footer, and then sort by specific locations or a radius from the strike zone to see who is an elite zone controller? Or is it something that a large sample size of a full season tends to null out? Would expect to see Juan Soto near the top of this if it became a thing. I think that's a great projection for someone who might be at the top. Thanks for listening. This is a great question. Because the decision to swing at a pitch outside the zone, it's pretty vague. If you're swinging at a very competitive pitch that narrowly missed the zone, you probably should have swung at that pitch in some ways because it's almost impossible to tell that it's not a strike. But if you are swinging at the 55-footer because you're just hacking wildly, those count as the exact same sort of result in terms of how just basic O-swing is calculated.
Yeah, and I have a stat, and Juan Soto is number one. There's a stat from Stats Reform called Discipline Plus. Yeah, of course. And the idea is they scout these hitters and they look at where the hitters have traditionally been successful, and then they map their swings against those locations in which they've been successful. So they give them credit for swinging at pitches that are in those zones that they've been successful and not swinging at pitches where they haven't been successful. That's sort of what you're talking about, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a big part of it. And I think it's interesting that Soto's first on that list. You have the list in front of you, so I was trying to think, who else do we consider to have really good plate discipline?
Well, the other person you think is on here.
Freddie Freeman? Well, Trout.
I don't know if Trout's not on here because of
missed
sample or something, but I've got the list. Number 2 is Brandon Nimmo, dude.
Oh, yeah, Nimmo, sure.
Yeah. Number 3 is Dylan Moore, which might be a little surprising based on his strikeout rate, but I think he's like barely a major leaguer, and this is his skill. You know what I mean?
He's kind of toolsy, though.
Yeah, I mean, I guess he steals some bases. But how about this? His contact ability is like a 30.
Yes.
and you would normally think that would create a major leaguer, but because his discipline is an 80 and he has a couple other skills like defense and speed, that's why he's a major leaguer. Brandon Belt is 4th. Andrew McCutchen is 5th. Alex Bregman is 6th. Jake Fraley. There we go. Two Mariners. Maybe they value that. Chris Taylor, Yandy Diaz, Max Muncy is 10th. Tommy Pham is 11th. Mark Canha, Joe Panic, and Clint Frazier. I actually bought a share of Clint Frazier because Clint Frazier is on this list and he's on the barrel list, and he had a bad season. So that to me makes him a buy low for me. I don't know that he'll be on the Yankees next year, or don't know exactly how I don't foresee the future on where he makes this value a good judgment for me. Like, I'd hate to see him up and down on the Yankees next year. That would be a bad move by me. But I do think he's a buy low. Yasmani Grandal, Joey Gallo. Talked to him about this a little bit, and he just said it's just been ingrained in him. That's just a skill he has. Buster Posey, Tyler Stevenson, which is a good sign for his ability going forward. Mookie Betts and Anthony Rendon. That's the top 20.
That's a group, I mean, generally of players that are very good.
Mm-hmm.
The less proven guys, the Dylan Moores, the Fraley's, obviously a little surprising to see them there. But Fraley, I always liked him as a prospect. I think it was James Anderson's rankings that really tipped me off.
He's one of the prospects of the weeks for us a couple of times, I think.
Yeah, at least once, and probably maybe like Toro, maybe a 2-time selection. But he's weird because he's been old for the level. I think it's in part because of injuries, kind of an unusual path to the big leagues, and this is the first time he's ever really had a regular chance to play in the big leagues. This is something we've gone through with Edward Olivares this season. We go through this with a ton of guys that sort of get stuck in the in-between. Maybe even if they're not quad A players, they're stuck in the up and down situation because they don't have a spot to call their own, and the team thinks that developing them by playing them every day,
organizational depth or whatever, or they just don't value them highly.
Yeah, so now we're starting to get a look at it. It's like an 18.2% walk rate. That's really good for a guy that you wouldn't be certain about as being a decent big league sort of player. He's showing power. He's showing speed. I don't know if he's done enough to prove that he belongs in the Mariners' plans, given the quality of the outfielders they have in that organization. But I think he's shown enough where if there's another team interested that trades for him, I think they're doing it with the intention of giving him another 400-plus plate appearances to see what happens. And I think it's kind of justified.
Yeah, and I'm absolutely kicking myself because in that OBP dynasty, that 20 team that was rejects, I had both Fraley and Toro on my bench forever, just trying to nurse them to the big leagues, and just injuries or whatever reason ended up dropping them like right before they finally got their chance. I'm just staring at them out of the People's roster, like, and then I get trade offers for that with them in it, and I'm like, oh.
That's always great. The player you dropped coming back into your inbox as a piece that someone else is trying to trade you. That's what you want.
That aggravates me. That made me angry. And it shouldn't. I mean, sunk costs, like whatever. Like, he has the value he has now. If I want him, I should get him. But there's a little part of me that's like, no.
No. The other guy I want to ask you about from that list is just Tyler Stevenson. K rate's under 20%, walk rate is above 10%. That's been the case for him at just about every minor league stop. I mean, high A back in 2018, he was 21.8% with the K rate, but still walked 10% of the time, showed a bit of power. He's shown some power already this season. How high is the ceiling? I mean, I think if he hits the ball in the air a little bit more, I could talk myself into a 20-plus home run season from him at some point in the not-so-distant future. It's just going to take the Reds giving him a larger share of the playing time and giving Tucker Barnhart a bit less.
Yeah, it's funny. You look at this guy and he's got this 5% barrel rate, and you say, okay, well, maybe he's just not going to be a power guy. That's what the barrel is telling you. And then the max EV 106.6 is not standout. However, he has a really nice home park, right? And the ground ball rate, if you look at his ground ball rates in the minors, this year is the outlier.
Yeah. And Barnhart's contract is a club option for 2022. I mean, they might like the way he handles the staff well enough to bring him back and keep those two together, but I could just see that playing time shifting more in Stevenson's favor because there's a lot in this profile to like.
Yeah, and they've been cheap in weird ways before, where they they didn't sign a shortstop. It didn't seem to be hurting them too bad. They're doing well, but they've been cheap in weird ways where they could just decide, let's go cheap there. We'll just have some organizational type backup and give Tyler the reins. So and already he's going to get close to 400 plate appearances this year anyway, because he's played some first base too.
Yeah, which actually with universal DH around the corner, there's a little more on the bone there playing time.
I'm all in. I think I would expect him to have like a 40 4% ground ball rate next year and like a 7% barrel rate and like something like what would be like 22, 24 homers over the full season.
Yeah, that would play just fine. Plenty of run production there, too. And getting on base as much as he does could be a little higher in the order than the typical catcher. So a couple up arrows, I think, on Tyler Stevenson after what he's done here in 2021. We have another catcher joining the pool because he was a big part of that trade that sent Max Scherzer and Trey Turner to the Dodgers. That, of course, is Keibert Ruiz, who is up for the Nationals now. I don't see Riley Adams as a big threat to his playing time, so I think we can pretty safely say that Ruiz should have a path to probably start 100 games for the Nats next year, maybe a bit more. And I've always been impressed by him in the minors because the K rates have been low. He's been young for the level everywhere he's played. What should we expect, though, from a power perspective? Because the power we've seen from him in AAA this season is another level above everything he's shown us to this point. 21 homers over 72 AAA games in the Dodgers organization and the Nats organization this season for Ruiz.
Yeah, he has the ability right now. I think he must have undergone a swing change in the lost 2020 season because he used to hit 45% of his balls on the ground up until 2019. In 2019 in AAA, he hit 49% on the ground. It's a small sample, but that same year in a bigger sample in AA, 44. And then he goes 2020. There's just the 8 plate appearances. Never mind that. But 2021, 50% fly balls in AAA.
Bananas.
And he continued that for Washington. Dude, this is a very rare skill set. I need to do this real quick. I know I should have done this before the show. I'm sorry, but I'm now going to look at. I think we've had like good ground ball rates, mostly this century. So I'm going to use ground ball rate. I'm going to use fly ball rate, and I'm going to look at fly ball rate, and I'm going to look at the top guys in fly ball rate and put the strikeout percentage on this because Keibert is projected to strike out 12% of the time.
That's a really low strikeout rate.
Yeah, it's really low,
especially for an actual catcher.
But then nobody does that, and then Barry Bonds does. Oh God. Okay, I'm gonna look for anybody who has below a 15% strikeout rate, and I'm gonna start at the top of the fly ball list. So Frank Thomas, right? That's a little bit more normal. 55% fly ball rate, 17% strikeout rate. And he was really good. What I was thinking of was Rod Barajas, 54% fly ball rate, 17% strikeout rate, terrible BABIPs, terrible batting averages. That's what I think of the guys who hit 50% fly balls. And there's other guys like him. Marcus Thames is on here, Greg Vaughn, Rhys Hoskins, Johnny Gomes, Joey Gallo. Those are the normal guys. Okay, here we go. Our first one, sub 15, Darren Fletcher. He was a catcher too, wasn't he?
Yeah, barely remember Darren Fletcher.
God, I barely remember that guy. Catcher for the Blue Jays? Yeah, catcher for the Blue Jays. And the Expos.
I might have put a Darren Fletcher in my bike spokes, which I was not doing my baseball cards kind of guy.
Joe Creedy. But these by the way, all these guys have low BABIPs.
But I also think that the higher contact
Tony
rate
Batista
of that era are just different players. They weren't trying to do damage quite the same way, or at least they weren't capable of doing damage the same way as hitters now.
Here's a name that you might like, Barry Bonds. Yeah, you don't think they were capable of what? Of
a lot of those guys, I don't think were necessarily capable of big power. Joe Creedy is probably a better player than people remember, though. He's a better player than I remember, at least.
It's
just
a couple
really
of 20 rare
seasons in there.
You
30 in there too.
Look at these BABIPs they're projecting Ruiz for, though. That might have something to do with the fly ball rate. They're projecting him for 260 to 280 BABIPs.
I mean, Creedy as a comp, just for a heads up, I think he was 15% or lower with the K rate every year from 03 to 08. His BABIP topped out at 271 and bottomed out at 229. So when you hit the ball in the air that much in the big leagues, guys usually go catch it.
And what was his batting average like? It was bad, right?
He was 261, 239, 252, 283, 216, and 248.
Well, there is that volatility that I've talked about with Aaron Hill, and Jose Bautista. I've talked about this a little bit. There's a little bit of volatility, I think, when you're a 50% fly ball guy. It's not something I look for and usually like, but you combine it with a 12% strikeout rate, which I love. It's an interesting combo that there haven't been a lot of players like him.
He's a little more pull happy with the added power, but not extreme to the point where you're worried about that. I mean, he's a catcher. He doesn't run well, so some of the minor league BABIPs are a little bit of an outliers because defensive quality there versus what he's going to be hitting into in the big leagues is different. So I don't know. Like I'm probably over the bat projection for him on the average. Like I get 269 and where it comes from, but I wouldn't be surprised if long term he's like a 280, 285 guy for a couple of years at his peak with legit like 25 home run power.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's tantalizing. I mean, yeah. As much as the Stuff Plus and Location Plus does not like Josiah Gray, Ruiz I think was maybe the big get here.
Yeah, they certainly needed the long-term catcher upgrade in the organization too. I'm trying to see if we can't really get any. He's only got two batted balls this year. But not really going to get much from that. 7 batted balls in parts of 2 seasons. I don't even know if we can
50% barrel rate. Bye.
Yeah, just gonna barrel everything. But would you agree that the ceiling is that of a top 5 catcher? The likely outcome is at least a top 15 sort of catcher.
Probably better ceiling than Tyler Stevenson that we were just talking about. I mean, honestly.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think most of the time that they were prospects, that would have been probably the way people had them stacked up as well. Mm-hmm. That's not a cut on Stevenson. That's more praise for Ruiz, by the way. So I think these are 2 guys that we definitely both like. But exciting times for the Nats to at least bring him up. There was no reason to wait. He clearly has nothing left to prove in the minors at this stage. Let's talk about some late season decision making. We are trying to chase down some titles. I think you're having a slightly better season than me because by your count, you think you're going to win maybe 3 leagues this year. If I'm lucky, I could win 3. I'm more likely to only win 1 or 2 with a bunch of finishes right around in the cash. So it's been an okay, not great year for me, but I think people struggle a lot with late season decision making. What are you turning to for league? The league that I'm probably most likely to win of all of them, and it's a 4-team race, so it could certainly be one I don't win. I was struggling just to actually sit down a guy like Eloy Jimenez, who only has 2 games for the first part of the week, to play a much less talented player. Like I know it's the kind of thing we talk about all the time, but when the season's on the line, sitting the better player somehow becomes more difficult. I don't know if you had that experience too, but I am struggling in a big way to make those types of calls right now.
Yeah, to some extent, I'm trying to lobotomize myself a little bit and just use the Razzball hitter streamer stuff sometimes. Just to kind of be like, it's also kind of hard sometimes to compare like, okay, I got 5 games of a top 15 type bat, or 7 games of a lesser bat, which one should I put in? Those are really hard decisions to just kind of guess at, so I do like using the streaming tools that are available to me. And then, the truth is that like, streaks don't really exist,
We want unless them to, but they don't.
We talk about adjustments here, and adjustments I guess exist, and people can find a new talent level, but it's probably rarer than we'd like to admit. And in terms of hot streaks, I think for pitching there's been some stuff, but I don't even think that's actually a hot streak. There's been some proof that like if your fastball velocity is up, that can be predictive of better results in your next outing. Well, that's not really a streak. You've actually changed as a player. Like your true talent has changed. That's not a streak. A streak is, the same person doing the same thing over and over again. And for some reason, it turning out the same. or turning out different, like turning out good for a while. So I don't know. I don't know if that's semantics or something. But in any case, the only way that a cold streak is a real thing is if they're hurt. So I guess I would like look through the kind of RotoWire or RotoWorld things, and sometimes it's not like an IL stint. Sometimes you look through it, and I've noticed this. I talked to Carlos Correa about this. Sometimes it's the little notes where they just miss one game or something, and those are actually super meaningful.
I was thinking about Tim Anderson as an example.
Yeah.
I want to see how his numbers look in these last 10 days or so, since this injury has been it's popped up on him a couple of times.
Yeah. I think I benched Tim Anderson in one league. I think he also has 5 games this week, and I was like, if he has 5 games and he misses one of those, or 6, maybe he's just 6, and he misses one, then he's 5. And I was like, and he's got the sore legs. But yeah, that's what happened with Carlos Correa. I was like, I looked through his game log, and I was like, oh, it just says here that you kind of stumbled on your ankle rounding the bases and missed a game. And you said that caused a downturn in exit velocity for a month. And he was like, yeah, that ankle hurt. So I guess if you're trying to look at a player that you think you should play or whatever, look at their injury history for the last couple of weeks, and just look through all the notes and be like, oh, he jammed his shoulder diving back to the bag. Wow, that's weird. I didn't remember that.
Are you looking at something like the Savant, ex-WOBA rolling charts, or anything in particular that people can pull up and just visualize to sort of line up a player's recent performance against some of that news? Because with Anderson, his past 50 plate appearances are below what we've expected. It does sort of sync up to say, hey, yeah, this actually is a problem for him that is probably pushing him down to 60 or 70% of his projection. So when you consider the increased possibility of missed time and the 2 days off, right? If you have this nagging injury, you have a day off Monday, you have a day off Thursday, you have a 2-game series with the Pirates in between. You can probably win those 2 games without Anderson. The White Sox incentive to sit him is much greater than it is to play him in those matchups. They can give him that rest.
That's an interesting thing too, yeah.
And then he falls into a 3-game week if he's feeling good by Friday, or because they didn't play him Tuesday or Wednesday, they can retro that IL stint if he needs it, get him back sooner later on this month. I feel like they're going to err clearly on the side of caution with him, and I think it is supported by that recent performance dip.
Yeah, that's interesting. Let's see here. Oh, I've got average exit velocity. I'm going to go into it by game. I used to do that. See, game is very noisy. I had a rolling, when I did look for these sort of things, I did a rolling 50 ball in play exit velocity, right? So it smoothed it out a little bit, but you still got to see some trends. And I don't think that average exit velocity is not very good for predicting future success. But what I do think it's a little bit like fastball velocity, right? Doesn't it map pretty close where it's it describes your upside. It tells you something about how healthy the guy is. So unfortunately, game by game single numbers is not really useful. I'm going to do by month. It's down against, I don't really want it by pitch group. I want it all pitches. So it's steady, I guess, in August, but I would want a little bit more granular than just the whole month, right?
Yeah, I think the whole month is not enough because, August, the beginning of August, the stock off was happening. Things were going great for Tim Anderson earlier this month.
Yeah, and in terms of monthly, he is down off his May and June peaks, but I would want something a little better than this. I think it would be nice if somebody had a rolling sort of 50 ball in play type exit velocity thing just to kind of line it up, because you can sometimes annotate and be like, oh, look, he jammed his shoulder into the base here, and then exit velocity went down for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Yes. Bet you could do that really nicely with Soto season.
Oh, I think it would line up very well there, because that one is so clear and obvious that it's a good just example, but it's these smaller non-IL situations, I think, that can can really throw us. And I think that Correa example that you've mentioned is such a good reminder that just because an injury doesn't actually put a guy on the IL doesn't mean it doesn't impact them for a few weeks or a month or even an entire half. I mean, I keep wondering about that with Xander Bogaerts and a few players that have been hobbled for a pretty long window this year. So anyway, I just thought this was interesting because I've been kicking myself with some of these tough decisions over the last few lineup periods in particular. You don't want to make mistakes, but like every decision carries equal weight. It just feels like they carry equal or greater weight this time of year. We had a question come in about John Means and location strategy, which is another recurring topic on the show. And this comes from Trevor. Trevor writes, in watching John Means this year, it seems like he tends to give up hard contact on four-seamers at the top of the zone in two strike counts that he doesn't quite elevate enough above the zone to induce chases and whiffs. Does your research indicate the same? And if so, is there anything about the shape of his fastball that should caution against that strategy for him? And related, how much do pitchers have if a team prefers a certain... How much say do pitchers have if a team prefers a certain location strategy for them? I'm trying to decide if the Orioles coaching might hinder Means' future ceiling in making keeper decisions. So first part of that question, are you seeing what Trevor is actually witnessing with John Means?
Yeah, I took a look at the Fangraphs heat charts for his fastball this year, and he's giving up basically like a 200 ISO at the top of the zone. And even one ball, like even that first sliver above the zone, he's giving up a lot of power. So I think maybe he needs to like go, another sliver beyond, he needs to go from like right above the zone to like above the zone. But generally also when I look at this heat map, he also gives up a fair amount of hard contact at the bottom of the zone. And I think that, some part of it is just his ballpark. And then his fastball by stuff is about average. So it's like an average pitch in a really tough park. The location plus on the pitch is 99.7. So basically an average fastball in a really tough park. And so that part, I think, is a little bit less interesting than the other part of the question. Which I think it is a fascinating sort of look into this. There's a person, Michael Fisher, who runs a place called Codify, and Codify gives you basically like a GG plot, like a heat map of how the batter does against certain pitch types, and it's been normalized for your pitch types, right? So if you've got a rising four-seamer, you get a different heat map for your four-seam than if you have maybe a straighter one or more of a two-seam type, movement on that four-seam. So somewhat normalized for pitch type movement, and then it tells you the best locations for this hitter in sort of a heat map. Most teams have that. And behind the scenes, I've heard grumbling from teams being like, why are they paying this guy? We have that, like use our stuff, please. But other teams have said whatever makes them feel confident. The confidence is actually just as important as getting the location exactly right. So they're okay with it. But the last part that I want to add here is we're doing the validation for stuff plus and pitching plus and location plus. And we have this really interesting findings keep coming out of this. And one of them was that on the per pitched level, location is more important than stuff for outcomes, right? So we've heard this before about sliders, that location might be more important than slider stuff. But in fact, it's true for all pitches that hitting the right spot is more important for that pitch than how the shape that it used to get there. However, stuff is stickier year to year. And part of that, I think, is what's at root here. And the question is, your pitching coach changes from year to year. Your organization might change from year to year, and then you have these sort of micro health problems that we were just talking about with the hitters that may not change your velocity, but change your ability to hit the spot that you want. right? And so basically, the reason why we bet on stuff is because stuff is stickier year to year. Stuff is kind of, and I just got a DM from Max saying that stuff predicts ERA better than location. So there's something about stuff that's like a straight rod, and then the person, the chaos around it is health and location. You know what I mean? And yes, for one pitch, if you can hit that little bit, that little inside top of the inside corner of the strike zone at the nipples, like right there, then you're golden. There's almost no hitter that's going to do much with that, right? If you could do that over and over again, you could probably just do that. But I mean, like Jake McGee exists, but that doesn't mean that location is a better thing to bet on overall. So anyway, long story short, John Means has good stuff. He has a really bad ballpark that's hot right now. It's at its worst that it ever is. And I can't say that his pitching coach is bad, but he could have better and worse years depending on how that location works out around his stuff.
And so much of the John Means future, I think, hinges on just getting out of the ballpark, regardless of the quality of the coaching that he's getting there. I keep seeing so many similarities between him and where Matthew Boyd's stock was a few years ago. The Tigers never seemed to get what they wanted for Boyd, so they held on to him. Probably a longer-term sort of mistake, regardless of what you think of Boyd, because they could have probably got some good young talent back a couple years ago. I don't think the Orioles are going to make that same mistake. We've talked about them a lot lately, just as a rebuilding team that might see through the rebuild and end up in the 80-win range anyway. They might not be able to crack the top of the AL East. If they're going to get there, it's going to take a few more decisions to trade some guys, Means being among them, and acing those trades too. That's going to be really important for the future in Baltimore to make sure the couple of guys they have with control left who will bring them back more talent actually do move and actually bring back the impact guys they need.
Yeah, I don't know, man. I just feel like I think these things come together kind of quickly. I think that you could look at the Padres after that first, remember that had that first burst of movement when he first got there, Preller first got there, and then they sold everyone away. Do you think that like they look like they were in a good space?
I don't think that first group of player acquisitions, I think you're referring to like the Matt Kemp,
Kimbrel,
Justin Upton, Kimbrel, Padres.
Yeah. I didn't think they looked good, but I'm saying once those guys all left, do you think that like the Padres were in good shape?
Yeah, because they still had a system that people were believing in at the time, right? They were already laying that sort of.
Well, aren't the Orioles systems getting good ratings right now?
Depends on who you ask. I know Baseball America is really high on them, but I don't think that's necessarily a consensus opinion, even though I think everyone agrees Adley Rutschman is a long-term, like decade-long impact player behind the plate. Grayson Rodriguez is one of the best pitching prospects in the
That's what I'm saying. Like, what if Grayson Rodriguez turns out to be better than Means? Now you've got like someone who's better than Means. You got Means. Maybe DL Hall is slightly worse than Means. Okay, now you got three legitimate major league pitchers on top of that. And then you start looking at the group of position players they've got. You don't have the star yet, but I think that stars are really hard to like. If you look at what people like, I did this for the Cashman piece with Mark Carrig. We looked at who has drafted the major leaguers that are in baseball today, and the top three teams were the Cardinals, the Rangers, and the Yankees. Now the Yankees have developed a star, but the Cardinals and Rangers both have had a really hard time developing a star. You know, they've packaged together all their normal guys to try and get stars, but none of them have made a star. So like creating a star, I think, is somewhat lucky.
It's kind of interesting because this circles back a little bit to something we were talking about on Friday and watchability and, you know, whether or not the Rays play some sort of brand of baseball that's less enjoyable than others. And, you know, I took my position that it's the same kind of baseball everybody else is playing. And for a star, though, like there's a little bit of a beauty in the eye of the beholder sort of thing. And it's kind of like developing an ace. It kind of depends on how you define a star and how you define an ace, right? Like wherever you want to draw those cutoffs. But the reality is both of those things, as they are most commonly defined, aces and stars, are more rare than we want to believe. There aren't enough aces and stars to go around for every team to have multiples, because if they were that common, they wouldn't be aces and stars. They'd just be very good players instead. So I just think this is one of these problems, air quotes, problems that we kind of put on ourselves collectively, expecting there to be more elite players than there actually can be.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And so I use that point to say that I think the Orioles could be good soon because they're developing guys. You know, like Ryan Mountcastle, not a star, but a major leaguer, you know, and they're going to keep finding these guys. Santander in a regular season, a guy. Cedric Mullins might not be the kind of star-esque player he is this year, but he'll go back to being a guy. And that's all you can do is just make sure you have a guy everywhere, you know, and then try to improve upon those. I mean, that's what the Giants did, right? They're like, oh God, we have like 5 guys, and you need like 30 to 40 to have a good season. And all that their general manager did was to try and improve the bottom of the roster over and over again. And now they have one of the best AAA lineups in baseball.
Yeah, and in terms of position players, only Posey and Crawford have been north of 2.5 wins based on
and you wouldn't call I think the Giants are a great example of this. You wouldn't call Crawford a star. I don't think you call Belt a star. Posey is a star, but Rutschman could be a star on the same sort of Posey level. So
doesn't this kind of get back to almost a fantasy argument too? But in real life, you can win the World Series with 2 aces and just kind of 3 decent guys in the back of the rotation if your decent back end guys don't get blown up in the postseason and your aces do ace things. But you can also win with a bunch of 3s if your 3s are just consistently good and your offense shows up. Like this,
fantasy is
to win.
Fantasy for the most part is more like regular season ball. You're more likely to win being sort of Billy Beane, right? Where you're just like, get the undervalued guys, make sure you don't have any holes. That's been sort of my process, is buy innings pitched, buy plate appearances, make sure you accrue the most counting stats, just make sure you don't have any holes, make sure you account for everything. And you don't always need to have like that breakout star to compete and to win. It's not quite like postseason ball where I think the stars matter a little bit more.
Right. And that style you described, that's more the Ariel Cohen, Jeff Zimmerman, Larry Schechter style of play. Whereas I take the hair on fire, let's just build the stars and scrubs. Let's hit on those scrubs and build the super team. And it works sometimes, but those guys win more than I do. So clearly
it is fun though. Your way can be more fun.
I do have a lot of fun. I don't know how much fun those guys are having. I think when they win, they're having plenty of fun. I think when they fall just short, they're not having as much fun.
But it's also like building on the back of like Adam Engel and Kevin Kiermaier and just guys that will play. It's a little bit less fun than being like, but I had Wander Franco in his first breakout year, you know.
I mean, the smartest possible way to do it is to build the balanced approach, then just take the right shots cheap with your bench and get the scrubs right, but then just don't overpay for stars. Like that's
where I've been trying to go.
It's like 80% what those guys do, or 90% what those guys do, and like 10 to 20% what I've been doing. So if I can find the common ground between those two approaches, then I think I can have even more sustained success and be a pain in those guys' butts collectively in the years ahead. Try to reel off a stretch where I win a bunch of leagues against them, because they're all great players, and I think that's a huge part of why they have the success that they do. One more question to get to, one more topic to get to, rather, but it's both actually, because it's Beer of the Month making its triumphant return after a 2 to 3 month layoff. How has Beer of the Month gone by the wayside? It was Beer of the Week when the show started, and now it's like Beer of the Quarter, Beer of the Semester. Like it's coming back as part of field trips and West Coast DVR. Beer of the Month is making a triumphant return.
Some of the stuff is a little bit easier in the off season when there's less stuff going on.
Also that, but Beer of the Month was a question from Michael, because it came with a recommendation as well. And his question was about Seth Beer, because back in 2015, and Michael lives in Atlanta, Seth Beer was a really big deal in that area as a high schooler, and mashed as a hitter, pitched really well in high school, graduated early, went to Clemson, was college baseball's player of the year as a freshman, and now he's stuck behind Christian Walker in Arizona. So what's the deal with Seth Beer, first and foremost? Is he worth a $1 stash in auto new and other deep leagues, sort of looking ahead to next season and how maybe Arizona will open up a spot for him and see what he can do with a large amount of playing time?
I thought there was a baseball player. Yes, there he is. Brett Pill. I thought it was Pills. No. I thought it was Pills. Just put an S on there.
I thought you were going to go to Joey Pancake.
Joey Pancake. No, Seth Beer, I think he has a chance. Christian Walker's taken a big step back. And Beer combines good strikeout rates with excellent power. He's done it all the way up to AAA. I think he's running out of reasons not to have him in the big leagues. So I would actually expect him to get a fair amount of plate appearances next year. I don't know if he'll be up right in the beginning of the season because the team seems kind of bad. But, if they play a little better than usual, see him in May.
They really, really should not wait on him. And this is not the service time thing. It's he'll be 25 years old.
Yeah.
Let him play. Play him. Don't make him wait until he's 32 to become a free agent. Don't be clowns about it.
And how much do you care about making sure you have his 32-year-old season? He may be one of these guys that doesn't necessarily have a super long career. I mean, he's a first baseman.
Might still be a big leaguer at the end of that time, but probably won't be a guy that you're even worried about keeping on your roster if all the rules are still the same as they are now and he's a $10 million player.
This DH thing could be very interesting for Beer, actually.
It could be. His projection is actually pretty similar to Christian Walker's already, for what it's worth.
Right, and I think the one thing that the Diamondbacks don't want to do is lose Christian Walker if he's an actual asset. You know what I mean? That's what teams don't really like. They really don't want to release a guy that might still be good. So, but if there's that extra roster spot and there's a place that he can play, then I think you start the season with both Walker and Beer playing every day. And if Walker doesn't get it back, then you release him when you get a roster crunch, when you're a better team, right?
Yeah, I think with Walker and Beer, they can coexist in a universal DH situation. And that probably makes a lot of sense. Walker will be arbitration eligible for the first time this winter, so it's not like price is a major deterrent. So if they see him as a rebound candidate for next year, someone that's going to come back and maybe pop another 20 or 25 homers again, great. Keep him around for another year and see what happens. It's not the end of the world. If it doesn't work out, you can just play him a little bit less. I think he's probably better than he's been so far this year. I actually think a Christian Walker rebound makes a little bit of sense.
But I think also, if there is no DH, I do get your argument about just play Beer. But I think if there's no DH, they'll want to start the season with Walker playing every day to see if maybe it was just a one-year blip. But they will maybe only give him, if he starts next season hitting like he is right now, then he would be a release candidate.
I'm going to go ahead and put Seth Beer on my draft champions league.
He's a good
range for sure.
Yeah, he's a good draft champions pickup.
It's going to be there. And for what it's worth, he was playing in the outfield prior to this season. He has not played a single inning in the outfield at Reno this year. So they do not see Seth Beer as an outfielder. They see
they
Seth
made
Beer
that decision
as a first baseman and as a DH. So keep note of that. There actually is a beer recommendation here in this email. Let me grab that real quick. It's a beer of the week from Michael. Michael says it's a New England IPA called 00 from Arches Brewing in Hapeville, Georgia. Hapeville, not on many people's top 5 places to visit around Atlanta, but it's a growing community, and if you're flying in and out of Atlanta's main airport, it's a quick stop before your flight. The brewery does crisp, clean lagers and ales with a heavy focus on the water to brew high-quality everything. Highly recommended. I have not had anything from Arches. I also don't know the Atlanta area well enough to know how close. I mean, it sounds like it is pretty close to the airport.
Hapeville, Georgia. I don't actually know it that well. Let's see here. It sounds like it might be near Stone Mountain. That's where you come in from Hartsfield.
Well, I've got a friend that moved to Atlanta recently, so maybe there's a beer swap in order at some point.
Oh. No, it's not so far as Stone Mountain. Oh, hey, Phil. It's by College Park. East Point, baby. Oh, I know where that is. I haven't hung. That's a little bit on the southern part. For me, it's like I was in Atlanta. I was more like a Decatur, Midtown, Morningside, Lenox, Ansley. Ansley was where I grew up. Ansley Park, and then I hung out a lot down in like Fayetteville and Zebulon, Georgia.
Zebulon, I've seen that somewhere. Is there a Zebulon in North Carolina too?
Griffin. I don't know.
There is. There's a Zebulon, North Carolina. Why are there two Zebulons? I'll figure that out later.
The Zebulon in Georgia has like 3,000 people in it, so it's surprising that you heard that name before.
So it says 4,400 as of 2010 in the North Carolina Zebulon. It'd be kind of cool if the two Zebulons played like a high school football game against each other.
Just once a year flew over to each other.
I want it to be on the Ocho.
Or just met in Atlanta.
Yeah, they could just meet halfway. Draw the map. Somewhere in the southeast corner of Tennessee, maybe.
No, that was bad geography, but don't worry about it.
So drawing the map in my head. I'm like,
yeah. You put North Carolina somewhere weird, but
wait a minute. I'm gonna check that out while you share your beer of the week.
All right, my beer of the week is Monkey Space Mafia. Monkey Space Mafia. Monkey Space Mafia. Monkey Space Mafia. Yes, I believe that is. I got a picture of it here. I'm looking for it. Monkey Space Monkey Mafia. Space Monkey Mafia, not Monkey Space Mafia.
Is that in the "We Didn't Start the Fire" lyrics?
I don't know. It's because how do you reference to something? What is Space Monkey Mafia? Song by
we didn't start the fire. Wikipedia. Wait. See, it comes back around.
It isn't. We didn't start the fire.
Yeah, it appears to be. We didn't start the fire lyrics.
Oh yeah, and then there's a guy who made a song called Space Monkey Mafia, sampling Billy Joel's "We Didn't Start the Fire," using that line. So yeah, wow, good job. I don't dig on Billy Joel, so I had no chance of getting that one. But anyway,
I don't dig on Billy Joel either. I'm just familiar with his music, unfortunately.
Unfortunately, thank you for that. Okay.
Here come a bunch of one-star reviews for this. I also don't like Bruce Springsteen, so just keep throwing him in there.
No, I'm not big on Bruce Springsteen either. But anyway, I'm on this beer. It's from Moonraker. I like Moonraker. They're in Auburn, and in California here. But the point that I wanted to bring up is it's a cold IPA. And for those of you that think hazies are mushy and chewy, this cold IPA is super crisp. And basically you treat it a little bit more like a lager. You use some corn in the brewing process. I think you cold ferment it. As opposed to, it's like kind of you lager it. So it has some aspects of a lager. It's pretty crisp, but it still has the kind of sweetness and hoppiness. I would describe it as kind of like a crisp West Coast IPA in a way, which is actually really nice to have, even if you like hazies, because even if you like hazies, you don't want every beer you ever drink ever again to be all hazy.
Yeah, they don't all have to be the same. I would say my selection, which comes from Alvarado Street Brewing, which is now accessible to me when I go even to a grocery store, which is actually pretty amazing. It's the Strata, which is a little more of that typical hazy IPA, but I would not describe it as mushy. Like I think it's a little more on the crisp side. So I dig this one quite a bit. I'm going to bring one over your way here in the next little while. I definitely get the mango on it. I like when the write-up has flavors in it that I can't taste because it makes me feel like I can't taste things the way I should. I'm getting the mango. I'm not getting white grape. Can you really taste white grape unless you're drinking white grape juice? Is that a flavor note that a normal person can pick up?
Yeah, some of these things like they have must in them.
Yeah, must. Okay, sure. So it smells like an old closet. Or
Yeah,
tastes like
supposedly
that?
that's like grapes, like dried grape skin or something. So it's like the essence of grape. Sometimes I think of wine when they talk about grapes. I think, oh yeah, I guess I get a little bit of a kind of a winey thing going on here.
I guess if they were doing the Brut IPA or something, maybe I could pick up some white grape there. But I couldn't in this one. I thought this was a little more tropical than white grapes. But as you've said time and time again, you really can't go wrong with Alvarado Street. I don't think I've ever had a beer from them that I didn't enjoy. So I highly
Very
recommend
good.
this one. Strata's cool. Caught my eye. The art caught my eye because it's got like the old arcade game box. Kind of looks a little like a Pac-Man machine maybe on the front of the can. Gotta love Pac-Man. So beer of the month is back. Hopefully it's beer of the every other week or something along those lines in the near future. Sweet deal right now on subscriptions, by the way. If you don't have a subscription to The Athletic and you're not just seething with rage about how we feel about Billy Joel and Bruce Springsteen, you can get 50% off at theathletic.com/ratesandbarrels. 50% off is actually one of the best deals we do throughout the year, so be sure to sign up for that. Get all of Eno's stuff, get the occasional things I write. The too early fantasy baseball rankings for 2022, yeah, those are about a month away. Those are coming. I'm going to start working on those in the background. I'm already looking forward to that because something is clearly wrong with me, and it's not my taste in music.
Some of the validation stuff that I'm talking about with stuff and location will be up on the site tomorrow. I'm going to look at stuff and location and pitching plus numbers for debut debut rookie young pitcher type people. So I'm gathering all that. That's what everyone always asks for, So I'm giving the people what they want.
Awesome. And on a related positive note, we got more questions we're going to answer in the next few episodes. I know we're probably a few weeks behind on some emails thanks to my move. I apologize for that. I'm finally done building furniture and getting the ass on a daily basis, which means I can actually dig further into the emails and catch up on them. So if you send us
Guaranteed
an email,
way to get the ass is build furniture.
100%. Like the stuff we've been ordering, we're not getting fancy furniture. We're getting very basic furniture. Very basic furniture means you're using dowels and those little metal things that hold like the screws that go in. You twist them to like lock it in place. They're like little metal. Yeah, they're like pegs with a screw on the end. Those too. Lots of those in my life right now. But
Allen wrench.
All the Allen wrenches. I have the super Allen wrench here though. I have the Allen wrench in case you lose the Allen wrench that came with the product. I have like a 12-piece. It's like a Swiss Army.
Yeah.
It's a very nice piece to have. So thank you to my father-in-law for sending that my way because the entire world was pretty much built with Allen wrenches, as I've learned.
When did people decide that? We have screws. We have screws with like two heads on them, right? Like, couldn't we just go with those?
I think it's because there are a surprising number of people in this world who do not have tools. Like they just don't have it. So the tools got to come
with an Allen wrench. You can give it to them, without having to give them a whole tool.
Right, it costs 3 cents to send an Allen wrench with the pieces. So just an engineering twist for keeping it easy for people that don't want to buy tools. And hey, look, I don't mind using the tools. You get better stuff when you use actual tools.
I am a tool.
Yeah, same. That is going to wrap things up for this episode of Rates and Barrels. We are back with you on Wednesday.
Thanks for listening.